Hi.
Let's see if this works.
I can hear you good. How about
I can
you?
hear you too.
Okay, cool. Let's
Oh
share it
my
up
God,
then.
why was it doing that?
I also look better down here, so it works
Yeah,
for
I think
me.
I looked better down there too. What the heck? This was all, you just bamboozled me.
Yeah, I did. It's because I really wanted the good angles.
Do you want me to share it everywhere?
Yeah, if that works for you, sure.
Yes. Okie dokie. I'm glad we got that figured out because
I
I
know.
was like, I cannot, it was like listening to our conversation. Like,
Yeah,
I felt like I was in a
yeah,
parallel universe.
I know. When you took yours out, I can hear it too. But like my things, I wonder what the difference is because,
I don't
what's
know.
different.
It's the same. That's really weird.
So I don't know if anyone's joining us yet, but for anyone that is joining us, we're going to be doing story hour. Um, we're just making sure we share everything to the right pages first. But yeah, we're going to be telling some stories about people in the LGBTQ community that maybe you haven't heard about, but we think that they're pretty cool for one reason or another, and we're going to tell you about them today. So it's going to
Yeah,
be a
we
good
are.
time. Do you need help sharing this anywhere, or you got them all?
Nope, I got it. I'm just sharing to health ed and then to score, and then we're all set.
Nice. Of course, we had like 6 people on when we were trying to figure that out, and now
I know.
they're like, "Oh, you can't fool us."
Yeah.
We don't want to hear that nonsense again.
Okay. I'm all shared away.
Okay.
I'm gonna message our
Um,
group and see if anyone's. Oh,
get
they're
them
doing. A lot of
on.
people are in webinars, I think.
Yeah. So, shall I just get started then?
Yeah. I feel
Or
like
should we
more
give it a
people
minute?
will.
Okay. Okay. So, my person that I'm going to be talking about is Bayard Rustin. I definitely looked up how to pronounce his name, and now I don't remember, of course.
It's
Um,
okay.
but Bayard is his name. And I kind of mentioned him in trivia. I'm not sure if that was like a week or two ago.
I think
But
it was last week, just a week ago.
yeah, I had never heard of him. So I decided to look a little bit more into him, and actually, he sounds um, like a really, like he's just a really good person. Like he has always been like an advocate for human rights, and it sounds like he never like let anything stand in his way of that. Like he's had those strong convictions his whole life
Hmm.
and never hesitated regardless of consequences to stand up for those rights. So I
That's
was really
awesome.
into doing this research.
Yeah.
So um so to begin with, so Bayard Rustin was an openly gay American leader in the social movement for civil rights, also socialism, nonviolence, and gay rights. And he was a major mentor and key advisor to Martin Luther King Jr. And he organized the 1963 March for Jobs and Freedom.
Mm.
I'm sorry, the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, which like when I say that, that might not like stand out to a lot of people, but that is the march where Martin Luther King had his I Have a Dream speech. So it was
My person, that comes into my story. My person was at that march.
really?
Wait, yeah.
Wow. know. That's
Yeah.
so fun. Look at us.
Oh, yeah. We didn't even plan
We
that. We
totally,
didn't even plan to pick
yeah,
people within the same like era, but we did.
yeah. Um, so because he was openly gay, that has a lot to do with the reason why he was kind of like pushed back in the background and not as many people know about him, even though like you think, I don't know about you because we went to two different schools, but I learned a lot about Martin Luther King Jr.
So did I.
And I did not hear this guy's name at all, but he was like his key advisor and his mentor. So like
Yeah.
it's a pretty
You'd
big
think.
deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I bet if anything, it
So
was like the caption of a picture on one page of a textbook, you know, like I feel like it was,
right,
if anything, like that's all that he was like given.
right, exactly. Um, so to begin with, he was born in Westchester, Pennsylvania, on March 17th, 1912, so St. Patrick's Day. He was raised actually by his grandparents, but it was kind of one of those situations he found out later on in his adolescence that his one of the girls that was raised as his sister was actually his biological mother, but she had him
Mm,
when she was 16, so his grandparents ended up being the ones to raise him.
mm-hmm.
Um, so he was raised as the ninth child out of 12 kids.
Wow.
And yeah.
Big
And
fam.
they had, yeah, it's a really big fam. They lived in a Quaker household. So that Quaker religion kind of plays a part in a lot of his beliefs. So, growing up, he loved to write poetry and he also played football in high school. And one of his first like protest sit-ins he actually had when he was in high school, he organized it because he went somewhere with his teammates from football. They went to a restaurant and they wouldn't serve him, but they would serve the white players on the team. So he organized his first sit-in way back then. So his like,
Wow.
yeah, like I said, he like stood by his convictions like right off the bat.
That's
Um,
awesome.
he also came out to his grandmother in adolescence as well. And from the reading I did, I could be wrong, but I kind of got the gist that like he never, for the most part, was like ashamed of being gay or who he was. Like maybe it comes up a little later, he didn't like make it as well known, but it
Hmm.
sounds like he never had a problem with hiding it. Like he's very open with that.
I feel like that's rare for back then too.
Yeah, because you figure this was like late 20s, early 30s. Like, yeah. So, I mean, do I consider him after doing this a bit of an idol? Of course, I
Yes,
do.
yes.
Yeah. So his grandmother, the one that raised him, she was a member of the NAACP. So leaders such as W.E. Du Bois and James Weldon Johnson were over at their house all the time. So for people who don't know who they were like really big, like advocates of um, color people rights, I guess is
Hmm.
what they called it back then. Um, so this is where his interests really began with campaigning against racial discrimination and the Jim Crow laws. So back then they had the Jim Crow laws that made it legal for segregation to happen. So back then, Black people had to have like different schools, they had to have different drinking fountains, transportation, bathrooms, like you name it, it all had to be different. He then, I told you this was going to be information packed. Um,
I love it.
so he, yeah. in 1932, he went to Wilberforce University, which was an HBCU, which is a historically Black university. And that was in Ohio. He was involved in a lot of organizations, including a fraternity, but he got kicked out at the college because, of course, he was organizing a strike. So it didn't say, I checked a few different sources and I'll list them. It didn't say what the strike was for, though. Then he went to Cheney State Teachers College in Pennsylvania. And he was actually in like a singing quartet while he was there.
Oh my God,
And
that's so cool.
yeah, he was really into his singing, they said. And he joined the Young Communist League, but he quit very shortly after because they told him in order to be involved with that, he had to stop doing protesting and stuff because like all the racial segregation stuff was a really big issue and they didn't want too much negative attention drawn. And he said, no, like I will never stop fighting for racial injustice. So he left them. He went through an activist training program and moved to Harlem in 1937 and began studying at the City College of New York. And at this point in time, he was so active with like his different like protests, his sit-ins, all that he was already like on the FBI's radar. Not that
Oh my
he was like
God.
doing anything bad, but
Yeah.
they already like had him on lock, and he was like
Yeah.
still in college.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So when he left there, he became involved in efforts to defend and free the Scottsboro Boys, which I am going to leave a link if anyone is interested in that story, because that on its own is like a huge story. So there's a documentary I'm leaving in the comments there. And in short, what happened there is there were a bunch of people on a train. And Hannah, you tell me if this sounds familiar, because I almost feel like I heard it on MFM, but I couldn't find it on their thing. So I want to know if I'm making this up or not. But there were a bunch of people on a train, and there were 9 Black men ages like 13 to 19. So they were all teenagers. And there was a little bit of a scuffle, and some people got kicked off the train for causing a commotion. And I think that itself was racially motivated. So 2 women were in the group of people who got kicked off. So kind of to get back at the other passengers, they said that those 9 Black men, teenagers, they're not even men, those 9 Black men raped them while they were on the train. They falsely accused them of raping them. So this was a landmark case that they bring up a lot because it concluded a lot of stuff. It concluded that regardless of race, everyone should receive a fair trial. So there was a lot of like crazy stuff that happened during that. And Bayard was like a huge part of the advocacy that went with that stuff. So if you want to know more about that case, I left a documentary for anyone else to check it out, because there's
It does
like a
sound kind of
lot,
familiar.
right? Yeah.
I feel like I'll have to watch that later and see if it like brings up any
Spark
more
something.
memory. Yeah, something.
Yeah. And I would say more about it, but it literally would take me forever just to get through like all the appeals
Yeah.
and stuff. So Bayard was punished several times for his beliefs. During the war, he was jailed for 2 years because he refused to register for the draft. Keep in mind, he is like a very peaceful man. And that was his big thing. You'll see, both because of his beliefs as a Quaker, and then you'll see later some other things come into part. So when he was in jail, he got into even more trouble because he was having protests at the jail because
Oh
there was
my.
segregation within the jail. So, like, it didn't matter where he was going to stand up for what he believed in.
That's awesome.
Yeah. On top of that, they were even more mad at him because he was very open about his sexuality within the jail as well. So between the protests and him being openly homosexual, they actually sent him to a higher security prison because
Oh
of
my
those things.
God.
Yes, even though he was a nonviolent protester, and I mean, he wasn't doing anything to hurt anybody. So
Yeah.
he also took protests against the segregated public transit system in 1947, and he was arrested while there, and just for protesting, and he was sentenced to work on a chain gang for several weeks. And then in 1953, he was arrested for publicly engaging in homosexual activity in a car with two other white gentlemen. So it doesn't give specifics as to what they were doing, but he was arrested for homosexual activity, which we kind of brought up before. Like, back then, you couldn't even way after that, like, because this
Yeah.
was in the 40s or the early 50s, like, Stonewall happened, the 69, right?
1969. Yep.
Yeah. So even way after that, you couldn't even dance with the same sex legally. So, you know. So he in 1948, he ended up traveling to India, and that was right after Gandhi was assassinated. So he worked with a lot of people who knew Gandhi, and that's when he really came up with a lot of his nonviolent beliefs, which, I don't know about you, but I learned that that was a huge part of, like, Martin Luther King's whole thing is nonviolence, because there were other people who wanted to, like, be more forceful for their rights, but they insisted that it was all nonviolent. So it has a lot to do with his studying under, Gandhi's, like, disciples. So he was quoted as saying, "We need in every community a group of angelic troublemakers. The only weapons we have is our bodies, and we need to tuck them in places so wheels don't turn."
Wow. That's a really cool
Yeah.
quote. I really like that.
Yeah, I
That's
thought so
awesome.
too. And I feel like, anyone who's trying to make change nowadays could also, get a lot out of that. You're gonna get more for being peacefully demonstrating.
And that act of, like,
Because
putting your body somewhere. Like, when we see the demonstrations that are happening now, a lot of times it's, like, in front of justice centers, and it's, like, that act of, like, using your body, like these protest people marching. It's, like, it's so, like, cool to hear this story about someone that was,
yeah,
like, kind of a forefather of, like, that movement. Like, that's just so
yeah,
cool.
yeah, because you still jam up the oppression just by using your words,
Yeah.
just
Yep.
by showing up.
Yeah.
So he So in 1958, he played an important role in coordinating the march there was a march in England, and like 10,000 people showed up to that.
Wow.
So that was demonstrating against nuclear weapons. So it was like not that long after World War II. And then he met, excuse me, Dr. Martin Luther King. I don't know why that became such a tongue twister for me, but
It's a lot
um,
of names.
yeah, he met him in the 1950s. He started working with him as an organizer and a strategist, and like I said, he taught him about Gandhi's philosophy of nonviolent resistance and advised him on tactics of civil disobedience, because at this point he's been doing this for a few decades already.
Hmm.
He assisted King with the boycott of segregated buses in Montgomery, Alabama in 1956, which might have been something people have heard about before. In 1960, another Black leader, his name was Representative Adam Clayton Powell Jr., he threatened Martin Luther King. He said, like, we don't have a problem with you, but if you're going to let that homosexual man stand beside you, then we're going to have to, like, back off on our support. So unfortunately, that did drive a little bit of distance between the two of him, just because Martin Luther King did want, like, that support from other people, and he was afraid, unfortunately, that other people's perceptions of him being there, that Adam Clayton Jr. got, right? He actually threatened that if he didn't separate himself from him at least a little bit, he would start a rumor that they were gay lovers together. So
That's so
yeah.
awful. I feel like that really speaks to, like, I feel like we've talked about this before, like the intersectionality of like marginalized identities. So like not only was Bayard, that's how you say it, right? Bayard. Not only was
Yes.
he a Black man, but then being gay, like that's like double oppression. Like it must have made it that much
Right.
2 times as hard to fight for these rights, and it makes it all the more amazing that he was clearly so strong in his beliefs through his
Yeah.
entire life. Like that's so incredible. Like how
Yeah.
resilient must you be? That's so cool.
Right. And he was able to get a lot done regardless
Mhm.
of these things being thrown at him.
Mhm.
So it's amazing. Like, yeah, I, there are a lot of people that, can they honestly say that they stand up to their beliefs as much as he
Mhm.
does?
Mhm.
Um, which just really reminds me of Hamilton, if you guys haven't watched it yet. Because
Well,
that was
that's kind of
also
why we like
Hamilton's.
wanted to do this. Like,
Yeah. That also was like Hamilton's thing too. Like if you stand for nothing, what do you fall for? I
yes.
definitely see like that attitude too. So like
Mhm.
I think that's something to admire in other
Yeah.
people. Um, so his most famous accomplishment, of course, was organizing the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, where Martin Luther King gave his "I Have a Dream" speech, and he organized that himself. That thing was massive. I didn't look at. I should have looked it up to see how many people were there, but
I can look it up.
okay. So I'll wait for you. I don't want to move on yet. So
Let's see. 250,000 people. The
yeah, that's
largest gathering for
crazy.
civil rights of its time.
That's
That's a
like
lot.
25 times the amount he had in England. Like that's
Yeah.
pretty crazy. That's
That's
awesome
awesome.
though.
Yeah.
Um, so almost done here. Um, so after his last time getting arrested for, homosexual acts, and that was like in the mid 50s, between that and other people like calling Martin Luther King and others to distance himself from them, he didn't he didn't hide his sexuality, but he kind of like definitely also let that go to the background, just because he figured he could get more things done if he didn't make it so prevalent. But he never hid that part about
Mhm.
himself either. So during the 1980s, that's when he began to really open back up publicly about his sexuality. And a huge reason why that is because he fell in love with a man named Walter Nagel. And they actually had to go through some pretty extreme hoops just to get like the basic rights that heterosexual people had today. And he kind of switched in the 80s. He kind of switched up because the I don't want to say that the civil rights movement didn't still need a lot of attention, because even today it still needs.
Mm-hmm.
There's still like a ton of work to be done.
Mm-hmm.
But this is about the time that the AIDS crisis really started popping up.
Yep.
So he started to work on the AIDS crisis and become a huge advocate for that. And he tried to get the NAACP to bring some of their attention to that as well, because as we know, it affects both the homosexual demographic as well as different ethnicities get hit harder as well too.
Yeah.
Which you kind of talked before about those disparities.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, so I thought that was really interesting. So he ended up dying in August of 1987. His ruptured, and he was age 75, so he had like a decent lifespan.
Yeah.
I definitely think he got a lot done in